Hi there and welcome to Silverly Studio. My name is Jessica and today I'm going to be walking you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to make this super cute four-legged plushie. So I made a pony. Her name is Lola. But really this is such a versatile pattern that you can create any kind of creature that you want. I just finished teaching a whole class of 8 to 10-year-olds how to use this pattern to make their own plushies, and the projects they came up with were so adorable and so creative. They made dragons, unicorns, alicorns, which are apparently different than unicorns. They have wings. There were dogs, cats, there was a giraffe, a parrot, which was so cute. Now, you can really make any kind of creature that you want since it's such a simple, versatile pattern. If you head over to my blog at silverlystudio.org, you can download the whole pattern, and there's 4 pieces. It's very simple, and I'll link to it below in the description. But essentially, you can customize this however you want. I made mine about this big, so obviously it makes sense. And I was able to print all the pattern pieces out on one sheet of printer paper. Then when I was working with the students, I blew it up so it was a little bit bigger. I thought this would just be easier for them to work with, and then they could come home with a cuddly large plushie. You can tell here that they're about double the size, but again, it's so versatile. You can really have fun with it and get creative and do whatever you want. Now, if you have any questions on how to customize this pattern, just let me know in the comments below, because I'd be more than happy to help so that you can make whatever your heart desires. Well, let's get started. This pattern consists of 4 pieces. You'll cut 2 of the body, 2 of the underbody, which goes on the inside of the legs to make it stand up, 4 of the ears, and 1 head gusset, which adds some shape to the head area. For fabric, you can use 1 or 2 for contrast. I used this piece of micro suede from an old project and lined it with a cotton floral print that picks up the blue and adds a couple more colors. Now let's start by tracing each of the pattern pieces onto the wrong side of the fabric. I'm using tailor's chalk to trace around the outside edges, which will become the stitch line. Leave a little room around each piece so you can add the seam allowance later. And remember, you can download this pattern on my blog at silverlystudio.org, which I'll link in the description. Print out the pieces to whatever size you'd like. So first I'm tracing 2 of the body pieces, 1 left and 1 right. Now that those are done, I'm tracing the head gusset piece, but we only need 1 of those. Next come the ears. I'll trace 2 onto this fabric for the outside of the ears, and I'm also going to trace 2 more on the contrast fabric for the inside. But if you're just using 1 fabric, mark out 4 of these total. Next, I'm adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance around the body pieces. I love these clear plastic rulers since you can really easily line up your stitch line at the 1/2 inch mark and just draw it right along the straight edge. When that's done, you'll add 1/4 inch of seam allowance around the 3 smaller pieces, the 2 ears and the head gusset. So here we are, ready to start cutting out these pieces. Now for the contrast fabric. Lay this out with the wrong side facing up. We'll trace 2 of the underbody pieces, adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance around those, and 2 of the ear pieces, adding 1/4 inch of seam allowance around those. Over at my sewing machine, I'm starting with the underbody pieces. Pin these right sides together and stitch from the outsides to the middle. but leave a gap in the center because that's where we'll be stuffing our plushie at the very end. Just remember to do a back stitch at the beginning and end of your stitching so it doesn't come unraveled when you start stuffing it. To sewing the head gusset. Here I've pinned the head gusset into one of the body pieces with the right sides together. The gusset should basically fit along the front of the face from the tip of the nose to the top of the head to give it some shape. When you're doing this, make sure to line up the stitch lines rather than the edges of the fabric since both pieces have different seam allowances. Now it's time to stitch up the legs. To do this, match up one of the body pieces to its corresponding underbody piece, right sides together. It's kind of cute, right? So before you do this, you can trim the seam allowance around the underbody where you just stitched, but leave the full seam allowance around the opening since we're going to hand sew that up at the end. With it pinned together like this, we'll sew along the outside edges of the front and back legs. Start from this point here where the two underbody pieces come together. Just finished sewing up one pair of legs. Now let's move on and do the other side. A little tip here, when you're putting the pieces onto the machine, keep the underbody open and flat and sort of flop the head over to one side like I've done here so that you don't accidentally sew over it. Now the mane and tail are completely optional, but I'll show you how I added those to my plushie. I'm going to cut out a bunch of strips of this yarn from my plushie's mane. You can lay these onto a piece of paper, smooth them out, and sandwich them beneath another piece of paper. This makes it super easy to stitch down the center and keep all of the pieces of yarn lined up. Now you'll just carefully tear away the paper and remove all the little leftover bits so that you're left with just the yarn for the mane. Fold this in half along the stitch line and pin it along the back of the neck. Then sew a double row of stitches to lock it into place. To make the tail, I cut another small bundle of yarn and I'm stitching it onto a small rectangle. These pieces are completely optional since the pattern really can work for any type of animal. But I just improvised with the shape of this little piece here, so feel free to do whatever works best for your project. After sewing on the yarn, I'm stitching down the sides of the tail to close it up. I'll trim off the seam allowances so I can turn it right side out. There we have it. Now for just a little haircut. Perfect. So the tail's all done. Now for closing up the body. We're so close to being finished. If you've added a mane like I did, tuck the yarn to the inside before you start pinning the body closed to keep everything neat and tidy. Now go ahead and match up the stitch lines on the head gusset with the opposite body piece, pinning that into place. You'll stitch along here, sort of carefully where the two body pieces meet, right at the top. Then you'll go over the mane where it's sandwiched in between the pieces, as well as the tail, which I've pinned right at the back towards the inside. So make sure those pieces are in place before you close up the body. But if you're not doing a mane or a tail, you can just pin the body closed and stitch it up. Turn it right side out. It's all stitched together now, so we can trim down the seam allowances. I didn't cut across the yarn because I don't want that to come out, but everything else looks good. I can turn it right side out, going through the gap between the two underbody pieces. And here it is. Next step are the ears. To make these, pair up one earpiece from the main fabric with one from the contrast fabric. Pin them right sides together and stitch along the upper curved edges. Now, I got so excited that I accidentally stitched around the whole thing. Whoops. But you need to leave the bottom open so that you can turn these little guys right side out. And don't forget to trim away the seam allowances before turning them out. To finish off the bottom of the ears, fold under the raw edges and top stitch along the fold. This will keep all the seam allowance hidden, and you'll be able to hand stitch the ears onto your plushie really easily. Now for the stuffing and finishing. Your last step is to stuff the body with polyfill and close up the gap with an invisible hand stitch, like ladder stitch. Feel free to use whatever kind of buttons, ribbons, embroidery, felt, fabric, or any other embellishments you want to add some personality to your plushie's cute little face. Alright, so that's it for the tutorial on how to make your own little four-legged plushie creature. If you like this project, please hit subscribe. I have so many more craft tutorials, sewing projects, glamorous DIYs, and so much more in the works, and I cannot wait to share all of that with you. Also, if you try this pattern out, please let me know how it worked. If you're looking for more inspiration, head on over to my blog at silverleafstudio.org. My mission is to help you celebrate your creative spirit and explore the magic of making one craft at a time. If you happen to love crafting, textile arts, DIYs, I think you're gonna like what you see there. So join me over there, subscribe here, and get your creative juices flowing. Thanks so much for joining me today. Happy sewing, good luck, and I'll see you around next time.